Hello, everybody. Welcome to CU Data Week. Thank you for attending this presentation. This is advanced reporting in R, so we're excited. Grace is going to be the one to do the presentation. I'm going to put in the chat um, a link for you guys to sign up for any of our other offerings over the next 2 weeks. So we have a presentation every day from today until next Thursday at noon. And then next Friday, we have an office hours where you can come and ask any questions that you have about any of the presentations that you've seen. So you can also use this link to um, sign up for that as well. I'm also going to put into the chat is the link to the Dropbox to get the materials. I think Grace had updated the materials. So if it's a little bit different than what you currently see, the new updated materials can be found at this Dropbox. And this will also give you access to the materials for the whole entire 2 weeks. Every single presentation has their own folder with all the materials that are relevant to that presentation. And then please stay until the end so you can receive our attendance survey. So this is just getting your feedback on this specific presentation. And then any feedback of anything that you would like us to do next year and you're interested in learning about next year. We're always trying to evolve and make this data week accessible and give presentations that you guys would find interesting. But every survey seminar that you stay in, every seminar survey that you complete, you will earn, you'll be entered into a raffle to win one of five $75 gift cards to Amazon. So please stay to the end. I'll put that up about the last like 5 or 10 minutes so that you can complete that survey and then get entered into the raffle. So that's all for me. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'll be monitoring and I'll let Grace know so she can answer any of your questions. And so, Grace, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. Yeah, like she said, my name is Grace. I'm a master's level research scientist at CETA. I work a lot with hematology, GI, nursing, and OBGYN departments. So a lot of that includes making reports for my collaborators. So this is kind of just like a compilation of all like the things that I use on a data, like on a average project, and I think would potentially set somebody up to success if they or for success if they wanted to create their own report for something that they're working on. So these are hopefully a lot of good, helpful like tips and tricks. So um, my goal for this session is, I guess I have like three-ish goals. The first is to orient to R Markdown and explain the different types of output and kind of what they look like, how to edit them. I have like a big R Markdown document that kind of shows a lot of these differences and things you can edit and change. So my goal is to walk through the example document and then like potentially show how you could use it on your own types of projects. And then as like you'll see, I have met some comments on like different tools you can create because R is kind of goofy in the sense that not every package plays well with every type of output. So I'm hoping to point out some of those differences in packages that play better with certain outcome or outputs than others. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and then let me know if you're not seeing my RStudio. It might look a little bit different than what you're used to. I only because I've swapped my console and my environment. I just whenever I'm presenting, I like to point that out to people because I think it's not the default setup. So if you're looking at this and it looks a little bit goofy, it's because I switched the lower left and upper right panels. I just use the console and script corners the most often, so I kind of wanted those to maximize space. Um, okay, so this is the document I have. Um, the kind of grand scheme of things, this can be output to both HTML and Word and PDF outputs actually. It has a lot of like tips and tricks tucked throughout here. So we're just gonna kind of walk through this and then I have the output of what it looks like on the right. So I'll we'll just kind of walk through this and go from there. Um, so yeah, and I'm hoping some of this is a little bit redundant, but I'm hoping that, I've kind of over annotated this with the intent that you could potentially open this in like a month or 2 months or whatever, and then still remember what we talked about. Um, so I think the most important thing to kind of, I guess I have it listed as orientation, but like kind of these like definitions that I think are important to know, or kind of like a grounding or foundation for working and reporting in R Markdown specifically, are the differences between an R script, an R Markdown, and a Quarto document. So the beginnings of R started with R scripts, which can only include code. So the benefit of R Markdown is that you can mix traditional language like you would write in like a Word document or something with code output, which um, it sounds pretty simple, but it was kind of like novel for the time, and it is still like very helpful and useful when you're creating reports and trying to like explain things in paragraph form and then also present things in tables and graphs and everything like that. So that is the main difference between an R script and an R Markdown, is the ability to collapse different types of output or different types of like format, different like formats, code and text and images and everything in between. You might see, I'm not exactly sure if anybody's talked about Quarto yet this data week, but you might hear the word, like you might see the initials QMD tossed around or hear Quarto. This is kind of like a newer extension of R Markdown. For the purposes of this talk, kept with R Markdown purely because this is kind of like, this has been around for a while. Like Quarto, I think, was introduced maybe 2 years ago. It's still kind of newish. In terms of documentation, R Markdown is like in like help, and if you're Googling and things, R Markdown is like still what people have been discussing online just because it's been around the longest. So I do have some comments on Quarto at the very end, just in case you, for some reason, you want to proceed with that. But for the sake of like discussion online, and if you're Googling and if you're trying to edit things, like I did choose to do this in R Markdown just because the prevalence of it has just been so strong. And they really are so similar. For most people, I would argue Quarto documents are kind of, besides a couple of changes in syntax, are almost identical to how you would interact with an R Markdown. Quarto does offer some like extensions if you're doing some like pretty intense coding. But yeah, I don't think that's important. It's kind of out of the scope for this project. I just spelled functionality wrong. I'll change that later. Um, okay, so when you are, the entirety of this is written in like how you would interact with like a Microsoft Word document, etc. Um, so I see the question in the chat, is R Markdown similar to GitHub? Uh, I guess they have different purposes. So GitHub, the main purpose of GitHub is that um, it's like a version control situation. So if you go to GitHub, you can put your project online, and then you can, if I like say I were to make a bunch of changes to this document, and then I accidentally broke the whole thing and I don't know what's going on, I can revert back to the version I had last week on GitHub. So that tracks like every space that's been added, every character that's been added or deleted. So that's kind of the benefit of GitHub. R Markdown is more of like a file type. So I would say R Markdown, like they're kind of different purposes. GitHub is more about version control and making sure you're tracking each and every change to the, whatever folder is being tracked. And then R Markdown is more about um, combining like, we have paragraph form here, and then we have some code written here. Did that answer your question? Let me know if not. Cool. Okay, so to initialize a code chunk, and also this is what this looks like rendered. So this is a little bit easier to read over here. Um, so this is all written in like just regular how you would type in like a Microsoft Word document. You can see that like I have this written in a bullet, like when this is rendered, the dashes and the tab set create this like bullet point list. the asterisks around a word create the bold wording. So this is kind of just like tips, and like these are just kind of helpful when you're writing something in paragraph format, just to kind of format things that you might be used to doing in Microsoft Word, but not entirely sure how to do in R Markdown. Um, so to initialize, or like to kind of mark the differences between like the traditional code chunks and the text paragraphs, you would use you would use the different, like they're called ticks, like the back tick, and then you would assign it with like the curly bracket R and then the reverse curly bracket, like so. Like I've named this one hello, but you can tell this is now a code chunk because the background is kind of grayed out. I don't know if you can see that on it when I'm sharing screen, but that is what the different, like that's what differentiates the paragraph coding or the paragraph writing between from the coding sections. So that's kind of when you're looking at any markdown, that's kind of like the big difference between any other type of coding language or any other type of like file format, is that this is like these are in the same file and they can be collapsed similarly in the same output. Um, okay, and then the YAML. This is the YAML refers to this bit of code at the very top. This is how you tell R, or you tell R Studio uh, what's being what's being output. If you want to add a title to it, like I believe the default prompts you to input a title, an author, and a date. I've kept those for this. But this is how you define the output of interest. You will see that I have both HTML and Word document here. I've commented out the Word document just for now. I'm going to change the type of output at the very end. So just for now, ignore the Word document. But this is how you define the aesthetics of things. This is how like the format of things, that like you'll notice the background of my code chunks when it's rendered are dark colored or like a dark gray. That comes from this called highlight espresso. If I don't want my chunks to be, or my sections to be numbered, I can change this to no. If I don't want a table of contents for some, like this, like all of those um, differences and edits, like those can all be made here. Like this is telling R the structure of what's being output. Also, like this is, you can pop this out and make this bigger, like when you're working on this um, at home. So if you like if you don't like this table of contents, like you can, that's how you can like prevent it from rendering any outcome or any output. Um, so that's the YAML. That's how you define the type of output. I also just have some tips about like the text. Like you can format the text how you would similarly to Word. Like you can italicize things with wrapping the text in singular asterisks like this, or you can wrap it in two asterisks and have it be in bold. You can also highlight text by um, doing something like this, where you have the less than sign mark, greater than sign, and then when you want to stop highlighting, you do the same, but with like a forward slash before the words, or before the word mark. And then similarly, you can like make the text look really small by doing the same thing, but instead of the word mark, it's the word small. And it looks really itty bitty. Uh, the benefit of uh, the benefit of using R Markdown specifically is that it's very powerful, very useful with equations. Like if anybody's used like LaTeX or Overleaf or any of those like online platforms that are often preferred if you're doing anything with like equations, that like the LaTeX format does work in R, so you can write an equation how you would similarly to any of those other platforms. And if you aren't familiar with that, then there are some buttons I'll point out in a minute about that will kind of like help you remember how to write equations and things. But it does, like, this is just a little bit friendlier for drafting any complicated equations that might be useful if you're like trying to create this like report for, I don't know, like a dissertation or something like that. I also wanted to point out the different types of editors. So you'll see now in the upper left-hand corner, I'm working on the source editor. This is like traditionally where you would create your R Markdown. Just this is kind of what was traditional or what was defaulted for the last, I don't even know how long since R Markdown was around. Kind of recently, maybe in the last 2 years-ish, they have incorporated this like visual editor as well. That's kind of like, I would compare it to like a soft rendering. Like it doesn't necessarily run the code chunks, but it does let you kind of double check that um, some of the equations and things are looking like they're supposed to. And it also does add a couple of like buttons at the very top. So I wanted to mention this just because like if you're like me and don't use LaTeX super often and like forget how to like insert a special character or something, you like the visual editor does have this button where you can say insert a special character. I can insert Unicode. Like if I need some sort of like Greek letter or something, like if I want to insert a gamma, then I can search for it and like not have to remember all the like different or Google all the different like how do I input a gamma into this like armored syntax where it makes sense to R. Um, these are just things that don't come up very often, but then when they do, it's one of those things I have to Google every single time. And then similarly, like they also can let you do the italics and then bold, just all the different formatting things that you might forget. There's this kind of like a user interface or like what they'll call like a GUI, like a kind of assistance to like turn some of these things that were written into code into like buttons or kind of shortcuts. So that's the visual editor. Um, and then the knit button, this is how you compile your document. So I think it's like you'll see this button here, like the knit with like the thread and the little knitting needle. I think this refers to like kind of knitting your like body of text together with your code. So if I click this, you'll see that this corner will switch to the rendering tab, and then we'll then execute every single chunk that's in my file, and it will tell you like which chunk it's executing, and then it will pop up with my output, how I've described and how I've annotated and everything. So that's I guess something you'll need if you're making a report in R. And then I guess another thing that's kind of useful is the inline coding. Like you don't always have to make like a full chunk to output some code. For example, if you wanted to just print the like total number of observations, or if you just wanted to print like today's date, like right here is an example of what's would be called like inline code. This is you would initiate the inline code with the backtick and the letter R and then a space, and then you can write like one line of code that will execute um in like and then it will print. So you'll notice that like for this, like the date, it's running this tiny line of code of system date so that it will print today's date whenever I render this. This is also helpful, like I mentioned, like if you want to print the number of observations, that way, if you're adding data at some point, like like you can do like n row um, of this toy data set, like empty cars, like I can always make sure the n row is properly uh, populating in my report, just to prevent from like hard coding anything. So if you expect numbers to change, it's kind of nice to be able to like automate some of that. And you don't have to like it just kind of looks nicer if you're um, like for example, I have a sentence here, placing R sum in ticks will produce the number for when knitting, like so. I hope that makes sense. And then the last thing I kind of have is like a quick orientation or like grounding situation is the different headings. So you'll see that I've initiated each of these headings with a single pound sign or hashtag sign, I guess. So the more pound signs you have, the smaller the heading, like you're kind of indenting it in. So you'll see that all of these have a single pound sign. So they are all in the first level header. Some of these I've indented, so you'll see that they have two headers. So if you want to like bump something in a little bit as like a subsection, you would add a hashtag or a pound sign. Uh, and then those are what is populating the outline tab. If you look over on where my cursor is, you'll notice that this is where the like headers are kind of getting pulled from, or the the titles that I've initiated with the like pound signs and hashtag signs. Um, okay, so does anybody have any more questions on any of that? I think got one question in the chat maybe. Um, yeah, I agree. Thanks, Lorenzo. R Markdown is analogous to a Word document or a file. GitHub is analogous to like a fancy OneDrive for programming. Yeah, I think it's a good analogy. Yeah, GitHub is more about version control and tracking changes, and it's not a file type. It's like the cloud, I guess you could view it as. Um, Unless there are any other questions, I will move on to setting chunk settings in different syntax. Um, okay. So if you want to name a chunk, which is sometimes helpful, like with error or troubleshooting, like if you noticed, I mean, I won't be able to show it now unless I render it again. Like it will show which chunk the like R is rendering at that moment in time. So if you're running into an issue where your file won't render, uh, naming your chunks is or does help with troubleshooting or error shooting when it'll say like chunk global options couldn't execute because of some reason. So it kind of helps guide you to what particular chunk is giving or throwing errors. Um, Sometimes you don't need to name a chunk. I think I have named them all in this particular file just for clarity's sake, but it's by no means necessary. It is also the only call. So you can also like I'll show you some of the edits, but the options you can change in the chunk are will all be edited in this top like initial line of code. But the title for a chunk is the only one that does not need a preceding comma. So you'll notice this is like how we would initiate any other code chunk with the three backticks, the curly bracket R space, our name, and then the curly bracket. The name of the name will immediately follow the R, but with no comma. And you'll notice that the default settings, I believe, are printing both the code and the output. So if you'll notice, I just have some toy lines of code. Like I have print hello 2 plus 2, and then I'm assigning the value of 5 to the variable or to the value X. Um, so the default is to show the code that's being prompted, and then also the output. So this is saying print hello, and then it's printing hello, and then it's showing the code 2 plus 2, and then it's showing now the output of 4. Some calls don't have output. So like anytime you're assigning things, that won't have an output. So some things, I guess, even though they may be like depending on whether or not your code is showing, like they just don't have like a message or like an output to show. So this is by default. A lot of my collaborators don't care about the coding, like the code part of it. So I think what is often common is there are some common calls that are helpful here. So I think most commonly people will edit their chunks with the call echo. So if you turn echo to false, this will prevent the code from producing, but it will still include the results in the finished file. So this is what I think is useful for probably most people or most reports, especially when your main reader has no or minimal experience in coding. Um, and then there's a call to include where you can have a chunk run, but it won't include either the code or the the output, so it will just kind of run in the background. I think these are helpful for things that like any sort of setup or like data cleaning or things that maybe aren't necessarily ready for your collaborator to review yet. Like if you are kind of working on something, um, and you're like you're aware that it needs some edits. These are things that are these are times you might consider using the include equals false. Um, and then I'll get to these in a second. But if you want to edit the calls, you would just add a comma and then type, for example, in like if I want to change, I can show you what echo looks like. Echo equals false. I'm going to save this and then I can knit this. It'll take a second, but then when it does knit, it will no longer produce the code that we see in the black. So now it's only producing the hello and the for, like the output of our line of code. Um, as you can imagine, this is pretty tedious to add to every single code chunk. So I have a line of code here to show like you can edit what's called the global options. So this is saying on every code chunk in this document, I want the echo to be false. Like I never want the the code to be producing. And you can always like what often I do is I run this line of code at the top of my R Markdown, and then I can always edit a singular chunk to have the echo equals false or echo equals true and like override that. Um, so yeah, I guess this is what I figure is probably most common. So I included that line of code. Um, the last two, I guess, calls I have are message equals false and then warning equals false. So, and I guess these are a little bit more self-explanatory. Message equals false prevents messages from generating, or that may be generated by code. And then warning obviously prevents warnings. Um, messages are warnings are more severe than messages. So a message might be something um, like we loaded, you called the package GT summary, but this is dependent on another package, so we loaded that one as well. So messages are more about like there's not anything wrong with what you've done, but something is happening that you should probably be aware of, but it's not throwing an error. A warning message, on the other hand, is more serious than that and is generally like I think the most common warning message I see is has to do with missing data. Like if you're running if you're making a graph or you're running a model or something and there are missing or observations with missingness, most functions will just remove those observations. And this is something that like you should be aware of. Like these are things that would pop up. It'll say like, three observations were removed because there was a missing value for your outcome of it, like your y-axis value. Or maybe there was like I think there's like a non-real number outcome where it's when you have any like infinities, like maybe you at some point happen to divide by something and you manage to divide by zero and you are getting infinities. These are all things that would pop up in warnings. So I think message equals false is often like pretty common. I would still be mindful to read them, but just to kind of be aware. But I think I hesitate to say, generally the better rule of thumb or the better practice is if you are seeing warnings, rather than just turning the warning equals to false, it's probably recommended to go back and edit or remove the observations manually or double check what's going on with your data. Like something goofy is going on. So kind of double checking what's going on there. Um, but if you're in a scenario where maybe it's helpful to have that call that you can toss in. Um, yeah, and then this is the global options chunk. Um, okay, yeah, and then for this document, I have a couple packages that I'm going to recommend just because they work well with all different types of output. So right now this is output to HTML, which is, the default, I believe, is to render in your viewer tab in your lower right hand panel. You can always pop it out, like I mentioned earlier. The other two types of output are PDF files and Microsoft Word documents. Um, I would say HTMLs are the most flexible, and most packages, I would say almost all packages should be expected to work in HTML. Um, it is not uncommon to have issues with PDFs or Word documents as your output. So for a long time, especially when I was new to R, I would create my reports in HTML just because there's just like such a lower chance that you're going to have any issues with goofy error messages or this package doesn't work with this output or things like that. Um, I do have an example like this document, the way that I've structured this can work for all three types of output. Um, I I've recommended a couple packages. I think there's actually I don't know, Samantha, if you know, but I think there's actually a um, session on tabling packages. So these are just the two that I like. But there are so many other packages. Okay, so I'm sure they'll come up in other sessions too. But there are so many other packages to make table. Like I know that there's a cable package that's like super popular, and I know that there's table one and table ONE. These are all like super popular and like very widely used packages, but I don't think any of them work with Microsoft Word as the output. Um, so I, this is kind of where like the reporting really has to tailor to like your particular collaborator and what your ideal output. The strengths of HTML, I would say, are it's super flexible. You have to minimal concern with like package dependencies or any package issues. And it's like I can show you like we can have kind of these cool like interactive, like you can have tab sets is what they call them, and these are fairly easy to incorporate, and I'll show you how to do this in a little bit. But these are all things that don't populate in the PDF and the Microsoft Word outputs, but they are kind of hard. Like if you're in an iterative project where you want to highlight and comment and uh, things like that's kind of like I think where Microsoft Word is much better when you can add comments and track the changes that way. So it really depends on your collaboration style. Um, all this to say, the couple packages I've included work well or can work with all three types of output. So if you think you're somebody where you would really benefit from being able to highlight and comment and all those types of things like you would in the Microsoft Word document, then I would definitely recommend these packages. If like I know if that doesn't really sound like you, like I know like the genomics people on campus have so much data. Like the benefit of HTML2 is that you can scroll. Like if you have really wide tables, you can scroll laterally and then vertically. So if you have massive amounts of data, I would say HTML is like probably much more flexible in terms of viewing and scrolling and making your reports manageable in a way where you can not be forced and have to worry about like the width of your page document. Um, so those are the big kind of caveats between the three different types of output. I added some additional help here. I'm not gonna go over them right now. They're just kind of additional output. I added a bunch of them here, but if for some reason there's like a niche one that I haven't listed, you can look for more help here. Um, So I have some, I'm not going to go too deep into GT summary and flex table. These are just things just for the sake of time. But so the way that I view these two packages is I think GT summaries, which is a package, if you've never installed it before, you will have to install it like this, install packages, and then you'll have to type GT summary, and it will install. And then once it's on your computer, you do this one time, you'll never have to do this again, but you will have to load it into your working environment like so. Um, so GT Summary is a package that's incredible at creating tables. And then Flex Table, I think, is really powerful at like table aesthetics and uh like highlight, say you want to highlight a certain row, or say you want to like the big caveat of GT summary, I think, is that especially if you're outputting to Microsoft Word, is that your tables will often run over like your like I think the default page in Microsoft Word is like 6.5 inches or something, and your tables might be 7 inches, and then you'll have to worry about trying to scrunch it to fit in. So Flex Table is much better at making sure the width matches. So I've listed my favorite functions from the GT summary package that I think most people would encounter in an average project. So I have a summary table package, which creates a summary table like that looks just like this. Um, I have, yeah, and then I have a comment here to utilize properly, make sure your data are formatted in a certain way. Your data should have to be wide format, meaning if you have multiple observations and they're in long format, meaning row one is from patient one, row two is from patient one at a later point in time, and then row three is also from patient one, but even from a third point in time. Um, this will report, say, an age for all three of those time observations, and it's really quite easy to accidentally improperly represent your age distribution. So make sure your data are formatted in wine format, but then this is how, like, I just think this package is very easy and intuitive to create a table that cooperates well with all the different types of output. So I have a couple iterations of this. I have like the kind of the bare bones. I just have three variables being presented from this toy data set trial. Um, I think there's a section on dplyr or tidyverse. So if you haven't seen this symbol before, it's a pipe, the percent sign, greater than sign, and the percent sign. Um, these just mean this is um, like it's taking what am I thinking of? Like a chronologic step of like these functions are being run in this order. So it's supposed to be an easier way to read this code. So this is taking the data trial, selecting these three variables, and then putting it into this function, which is called table summary, which looks like this. Um, this package is super flexible. I have a couple different iterations. Like this time I added a label. I changed to the mean and standard deviation instead of median and IQR. Like there's just a lot of different types of like settings you can change. So I have a couple different iterations. Like I have this time I have two different rows. I present median IQR and then the minimum and the maximum. You could change this to present both mean and median. So I've tossed just a lot of the options in just to like kind of display like how flexible it is. Um, yeah, so I guess proceed at your like I just think this is super helpful for any sort of table, I think, or any sort of report um usually begins with a demographic table or a summary table of the cohort of interest. So um and then looks we have a couple chats like an ampersand for yes. Um yeah. Thanks, Lorenzo. Yeah, and then I have listed a couple other uh and a couple other functions, table regression, if you want to present uh, a certain type of, like if you want to present a model. These are just things that I think are very helpful depending on. I just wanted to provide these because projects are very different, but these are just the ones that I think I use the most often. Um, you can also stack two tables. So I have created a table, like a model one table, model two table, and then I've stacked them on top of each other. And then you can also merge them side by side. So you can combine them left and right, and then add like a header. Um, so all these different tables I think are great. I can show you what they look like. I guess I have no headers in between them, but I just like that they are a line of two or code and they are pretty, oh, I have some errors with that. They're pretty flexible, very easy to incorporate, and it gets you I think, like a manuscript ready table very quickly. Um, and then I just have some examples that you can potentially refer to later. Uh, like I was saying, the main drawback of GT summary is that it doesn't like especially if you're outputting to Word, it does not like you will encounter a table that runs over the margins on the left and on the right side of the document. Um, this package, Flex Table, does have a function built into it it's called AutoFit, to adjust the width of the package or adjust the width of the table to match the width of a Microsoft Word document. Um, it does not always work. I don't know why. I don't know why it hasn't been addressed. So this is a function that I scalped from a like what's it called? Stack Overflow. Like 3 years ago, I've used it. It's saved me lots of hassle and time over the last like 4 or 5 years. I would highly recommend just running this. And then this is how I traditionally use it. So I would create the table in GT summary, convert it to flex table, and then output it with the fit flex table to page. Um,
Grace,
yeah,
there's a question. Oh, say if it doesn't work with Word, how do you get them
yeah. So the
into the
benefit of outputting, yeah, the benefit of outputting to Word too, the way that, and I'll show this in a minute. You can copy and paste too. Like, I guess this is another limitation of HTML is that once these tables are rendered, you can't edit them. I can show you, like, if I switch, I'm going to comment this out and then switch this to Microsoft Word, and then I'm going to knit this to Word. The one of the other reasons why I like putting a lot of my reports in Microsoft Word is that your collaborators will have some freedom. Like if you've it populated on my other screen. For example, if I like these are just the default ways of what the tables look like. I can scroll down a little bit further. Like if they've decided I ran this table with like these two different tables and I actually don't want care about this file anymore or this model anymore, then I can just delete um, the entire column. So there's a little bit more flexibility if journals have like a particular set of like the font must be this other type of font, then you can like kind of edit those or something like that. So this has way more flexibility after it's been rendered, which I guess can be good or it can be bad. If you're worried about potentially deleting things you care about or something or um but it's good to know. Um so I'm going to scroll back down to where I was. Um yeah, so I have a couple examples of how so these are all like I think most of these examples are tables that have been created with GT summary and then produced with flex table. Um, in this scenario, like sometimes you don't need GT summary to create a table for you. You can just create a data frame or something. Um, yes. Can you save and share a copy to avoid? Yeah. So this is this is just the default of how it's produced. You can always just save as like this. And then of course, since it is like a normal Word document, you could always uh like force it to be view only if you're worried about accidentally deleting something. But you would have to manually switch the setting from editing to
and
view.
just to kind of piggyback off that, I don't know if this happens in Word, but I know for HTML at the top part, I always forget what it's called, like within your
Oh,
code.
YAML.
Um, there's a way to have it export as that like the date that you did. Like when you knit it, you can actually
Yeah.
have it specifically be saved in a folder with that date. So every
Mhm.
single time, unless you like resave it multiple times on the same day, it'll just
Mhm.
override. But say you save it yesterday, knit it yesterday, and then knit it today, you'll have two different reports. So you can also add that into the top. Just
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't include that in this, but maybe I should add that in as an example before distributing the code. So, because that is something that's been super helpful is rather than doing like version numbers, you can always just have the date tacked on to the very end of the file name. That way, you know if this report was rendered in January or last December or somewhere in between. And it's a little bit more straightforward than like version numbers. So I think we were talking about, oh, I just wanted to point out you don't necessarily need to create a table with GT summary to use Flex table. This is an example of data that I just printed, like it's a data frame that I also produced or printed a table with Flex table. because I only wanted to point this out just because every now and then I come across a situation in my work where I don't have a use for GT summary, but I still need to output something to my report and I want it to look nicer. So Flex Table, and this is just like the defaults, but they have all these different themes. Like if you see the top version has no lines in the rows, and then all the text is not bolded. This is like a different theme where the row names are bolded. We now have the lines in between each row, but not the vertical lines. This is a different version. Like they just have so many different types of like themes for these tables. If you like if some are easier to read than others, you can change the back to be gray. These are all samples that I've like I can run all of these. These are all like uh they're all pretty simply implemented. Like this is just the theme called theme underscore vanilla. Um I think this is what oh this is the default. Um oh I set the theme or the and similar to like the global options, like Flex Table, you can have like like I think this is the theme box, but you can also set the default so that every table looks the same. So I think when I was rendering this, like this is theme box and then this is theme vanilla. And then just as an example, like if you wanted to set every flex table to look the same, this is how you would do so. Like set flex table defaults. Like if you wanted the font size to be 10 and everything to look like theme vanilla and have the background of this kind of gray white color, that's how you would do so. Okay, we have like 10 minutes left. So this is a ggplot. I'm not going to spend time on this just because I suspect there's another theme or another session about this, but I just wanted to also point out that this type of call in this chunk where I can set the figure dimensions to be a certain ratio. So for most output, I've found the ratio of like 6 and 4 to be, or like 6, 6, 6, 4, sometimes like 6, 8 or something to kind of be the ratio that like looks the best on Microsoft Word um, output. I can show you like what it looks like. It's just easier to read. I can show you the what it looks like. So this is an example of like the what an image would look like in Microsoft Word with the width. I believe it's width and height, and I think these are approximately like inches. So this will scale the plot to be that ratio in whatever output. And then just kind of as a comment, any type of output, the images will have an okay resolution, like they will not be super high res. If you've like decided that this is the graph you're going to go with, you're going to submit this to a journal and it needs to be high resolution. This is how you would save it locally. Like I think this is like dots per inch or something. I always just do 900 for a high res image. And this is a way that you could save it locally into like a JPEG, or if you wanted like a different type of image, like if you wanted to do a PNG, you could just change the file suffix and it would download in a higher resolution image. So I only mentioned that just because if you were to like come here and like copy the image and download it, like it's going to be an okay version of it. So generally what ends up happening is like we will iterate all the different color schemes and structure and all these different things um, in the reports, and then we'll come to the conclusion that okay, this is the plot we want to submit or like center our remotes around and go from there. So, oh yeah, a couple of things before we wrap up. This is how you would do the tab set. So you would initiate a tab set with the dot, like with this syntax, the curly bracket dot tab set, and then any type of tab you want underneath it has to be indented with an additional hashtag or pound sign. So for this one, I've initialized my tab set header, and then I've created a tab plots and created a tab tables. So this is putting like the plot in the first tab and then like the table in the second tab. So it's just like a handy way. Again, if you're outputting this is one of those things that will only work in HTML. And this is very helpful if you have a lot of data. Like me, I've seen people do this like stratified by treatment A and then like subgroup here. And then like if you have a lot of very similar things to toggle through or a lot of comparisons to make, this is a really handy way to like kind of toss between multiple comparisons and go from there. But this is again something that only works in HTML. So you'll notice if I scroll down to this in the Microsoft Word document, it just will render them like one on top of the other. So it will not produce an error and it won't like break your R Markdown if you try to do a tab set with the Microsoft Word output, but it just won't work. So on the flip side, the biggest con or the I wanted to show you how to kind of create or output to Word based off of a template. So I'm going to close this really fast. And I'm going to close these. So I'm going to go back up to the very top. And you can see that this is referencing a document, like it has a reference underscore docx styles template dot dot. You don't need this. Like this will run if you just have the output of Word document. I wanted to show what would happen if you do edit a reference document like so. So I have one saved in the same working directory as this file called oops called styles template. So I'm just going to open this. So this is what it looks like. It doesn't look like much, but the big thing to note here is that if I click the styles pane, um, this is how I can set the formatting for all the headers, how bold I want something or what text. So like I can like say I want to change how the title of my document is printed. I can click on the arrow here, go to modify style, and I can make it print in red font and then be bold and then save that. And like I'm just going to change a couple more of these. Like I guess this was printing as purple. Like let's change this to green. And then like a level 2 header, I can just change this. I don't know if you can see this. Like if I double click something, it like is highlighting which style it's using in blue. So I'm going to click the one it's highlighting um, and then I'll just do orange. So then if I save this document like so, I exit out of it, and I now re-render my advanced reporting R Markdown file to a Word document that references this, all of those changes will populate into the outcome or into the output um, on my different screen here. So now you'll see I have this is in bold and in red, this is in green, and then my level 2 headers are in orange. So this is like if you wanted to make sure your reports are in like Calibri or like Times New Roman or size like font size 14, like these are all things that you can change. And there's a little bit of a lift to like go through and like, okay, like I want my like I like the Calibri font or I like the Times New Roman font. It takes a little bit of lift to go back to go in and like make all these edits. But then the benefit is you can use this styling document on like any report. Like you just have to make sure it's in the same working directory and go from there. Um, it's a little bit circular. Like it's kind of goofy because you have to create the styling document with R Markdown and then reference that Word document in rendering your R Mark. So it's a little bit circular in that sense. So if you plan on editing your own, I would just take the one that I've provided and then edit how you see fit, um, and then go from there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if you have any other edits you want to or are curious about how to make, I did also add a couple like links down here that would um, kind of potentially help or see all the different types of output you could potentially make. Um, yeah, so I think those were all the big things I wanted to point out. Um, What questions do you guys have for me? I feel like I just went through a whole bunch. I know we only have a few minutes left, but
I did have a question, like I saw like a hide button for your code, but I don't know if that
yeah.
was in your output. Is that like something you changed in the YAML or something?
Yes. So that's a good
Okay.
question. I meant to mention that actually. So that is something that's mentioned. So this is it's called code folding.
Okay.
So it's called
Cool.
show. So that prompts this button. You're at the very top, you'll have a button that says show. This is again only works for HTML. Um, but you can have a button that says show all code or show or hide all code. So it's kind of nice. Um, and then you can say like, oh, actually, I do want to see what's going on here. But yeah, again,
Got
this
you.
is something that's done in the YAML. Yeah, good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I have a question. Do
Yeah.
you feel like you usually for your reports do knit to Word over HTML? Because I feel like I'm the other way. I usually knit to HTML over Word.
Mhm.
And like when do you decide to do that?
Yeah, I would say like 80% of the time I do Word documents just because my collaborators like them. My collaborators like to, like, I will try to send the Word document to them prior to our meetings. They'll like review it on their own time and like mark it up and they'll have comments about like like I'm surprised by this result, or this is like, can we add a subgroup analysis like this? And I think the commenting is just harder to do on HTML because the alternative is that you have to like make a list and then say like in section 4.2, you talk about this, which is I guess fine, but especially for smaller projects, I think the reviewing is a little bit nicer. Although I will say if you have a lot of data, um, or like really wide data, like Word is definitely limited in how much it can produce or it can like if you have really wide tables or like graphs that are like, you have a correlation plot where you have like 10 variables on the x-axis and 10 on the y, like those types of things don't translate well to Word just because you're so limited by like the 6-inch width of the documents. Um, yeah.
I was actually, could I ask a question on that note?
Yeah.
If you have like many, I imagine, right, that you have iterative conversations with the investigator. So do you like take your work docs as well? That way you know, like, okay, they made changes here, right?
Mhm.
Like, because I'm imagining you have many Word documents and they make edits on some, and
Yeah.
then others, it could be like hard keeping track of it.
Yeah. So I think what
So
um Samantha was kind of alluding to earlier, I think that's kind of how I like will approach it. Like normally I'll name my file and actually I can provide, maybe I can update the code in the shared drive to include this, like how you would do this. But normally what I do is my code will render in my like reports folder with the date attached to the very end. So then my collaborators will send back like the December version of this that's annotated. And then when I'm making edits, usually that's not the same day. Like usually the turnaround is less or usually never been one day. So at least the date will be like, okay, like December 12th, then I went through and made all these edits and then I can edit those things. And if I'm making a lot of changes and I'm making a lot of edits and it will like override, usually I don't care too much about like December 12th in the morning version of the report and then December 12th afternoon version of the report. Like usually it's not that granular. Usually it's more about like which versions of the report were sent to the collaborators and reviewed. So I think yeah, if there's the December version that has comments on it, I'll kind of have that up in parallel to what I'm working on. And then as I'm rendering it, it will have the new date attached to the output or to the end of it, if that answers your question.
it does. And it
Yeah.
makes sense because I think like, investigator comments usually don't happen as well in one
Yeah.
day. So I imagine like the next time they have a new version, it's probably like 2 weeks
Yeah,
or so. Yeah, I think
exactly.
it makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. And it takes
Thank
time to
you.
implement all this stuff, right? So
Yeah, gotcha.
yeah. I will add that. And then I'll have to upload, sorry, Samantha, I'll have to re-upload that to the OneDrive or Google Doc, whatever it is, and then but then I'll
Yeah,
have
and
that.
then I'll transfer it to Dropbox. So just check in tomorrow for anything that's updated, if that's enough time, Grace.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm gonna do it right after this call. So
Okay, perfect.
I know we're at time. I don't know if Samantha, I'm happy to stay on if people have more questions, but if you have to hop off, that's totally fine too.
I am a little late to a meeting, but I
Yeah.
am recording, so
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys for attending and asking such good questions. Well, okay.
Okay,
Thanks, Samantha.
awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Grace.
Bye.